wife Joe's perspective a little bit. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. How about work? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, I mean Hookdeck's great. I mean we're, quite small. We're I think like 10 people. But I think it's a sweet spot for me. It's good because you can be strategic, but you can also be hands-on and you can dive between those two things. It's a really interesting space to be in. Like when I joined Hookdeck, what, 2.5 years ago, I I thought, okay, webhooks obviously used a lot in APIs, the API space, used a lot in automation. Um, I understood the product a little bit, but it's yeah, blown my mind in terms of how big a problem it solves. Because I mean, Hookdeck in itself, we now got two products. We've got the event gateway, which is HTTP in, HTTP out. You can verify, queue, filter, transform, route, deduplicate, and then kind of fan out those events. And when you do transformations, you can plug it ultimately into a different HTTP destination, which could be an API. So that, it makes it like Zapier, except kind of lower level. And then now that we've uh, open sourced Outpost, which is like just outbound webhooks, and then create the hosted version of that. Although we had kind of that functionality in the event gateway, wasn't packaged very well. It was quite difficult people to kind of map the mental model around. Okay, we've got sources, destinations, all this stuff in the middle, and now this is just purely we send outbound events. I feel like we've got the like event space covered, properly and nicely packaged as two products. So it's keeping us very busy, and then with obviously AI is affecting everything. But I think with when even when it just comes to webhooks, because obviously we're thinking a lot about event destinations, so beyond webhooks. But when it comes to webhooks, webhooks trigger automations, they trigger work for agents, and also when an agent completes its work, it has to send an event, it has to send a webhook quite often. So we're seeing quite a lot of growth there without actually doing a lot from kind of, I guess, a product marketing perspective to kind of go, hey, like you see a lot of companies go, AI, right, right. We're repositioning ourselves to be an AI company. We haven't done that yet. We're still seeing, an uptake, a lot more AI companies. I guess every company is an AI company, but for AI type workflows. So it's just it's really interesting. And then also, internally thinking about how you use this new technology, how you're, become more efficient, how you improve your workflows, how everyone becomes a 10x something. Uh, I do generally feel I'm worried about it, for the future of the planet, but I'm all my children. But at the same time, it's very interesting. So I'm enjoying I'm enjoying work at the minute with some existential concerns around the outside of it, like I'm sure many people are.
So you just burned through all my questions. We're done. Thanks.
But hopefully there's a few things we can dig
I
into
mean,
there.
first off, I think we might have lightly touched on it last time we talked, but when I was at Postman and I was going through, I would go out to these large organizations and these teams, Nationwide Insurance, Kroger, big grocer, these organizations had done these big Kafka projects, these 2 to 3 year Kafka projects, and people were like, we just need basic fundamental kind of events. We don't need this massive approach. And everybody I talk to is just like, why don't more people do webhooks?
Mm.
Why isn't there more technology and open source tools and stuff to respond to this? And that's what I always felt like Cook Deck was, and what you guys were solving is just kind of this common man, everyday events without the fanfare or the overthinking it technically.
Mhm.
And it sounds like, I mean, you guys did overthink it. You guys have put a lot of thought up to a line, and that's enough. And you guys just kind of have your commercial offering, your hosted and your open source, and it's what's needed.
Yeah, I think like the event-driven architecture space, it comes from a very enterprise place. Um, and I think with that comes some necessary complexity and some over-architecting. Um, and I totally agree with you. I think that a lot of the problems within the EDA space could be solved by good documentation and good communication and HTTP. For both request response, but also for the event-driven asynchronous type communication. I do think there's definitely a place for highly scalable, systems like Kafka, event buses, the distributed teams, the three however many pizza teams in an organization, and having this kind of centralized message bus and pub sub around it. But I do think it can be overly complex in some cases. And I think one of the things we kind of talk about is, HTTP is definitely accessible to everybody. And at a certain scale, it's fine. But I do think there's at scale, it can become more complicated. And then things like having a durable queue like Kafka to reliably ingest and deliver these events, and having dead letter queues, things like that does make a lot of sense. But effectively, that's kind of what we've built in a much simpler packaging with HTTP and HTTP out functionality in the middle. That is very easily accessible and accessible to everybody, but with a bit more of a focus on ingesting the events from external services. So, things like Shopify, Twilio, Stripe. Whereas I think, again, going back to the kind of enterprise Kafka scenario, they're often internal services where they don't want things to leave their network, their VPC, whatever. So I think there are some considerations there that because the event gateway itself that we've got isn't open source, and we have talked about that. Would offering that as a self-hosted option, but Outpost is the outbound only. It's an interesting one. I mean, it's obviously, as I said at the very start, I think it's something that's potentially been overcomplicated. But I've worked with like event-driven architecture even when I was at Pusher, and even before that, Kaplan Systems, where it was PubSub, you subscribe to like stock ticks and then different events and filters on those events. So this stuff's been around for a while. But I think one of the things with technology is it can start simple and become complex, but it can also start complex and become very simple. And we've, I think, probably come at it in both directions, webhooks only, but also made something that can be inherently very complex, quite simple to understand and adopt, I hope.
Yeah, and I think before we get back to the AI piece, that complexity, simple to complex, complex to simple, technically leaves a lot of opportunity, good and bad, for business opportunities and complexity. And too, and can you speak to, like, I mean, you guys are staying small, and you have your commercial offerings, and you making the decision to have open source offerings. Can you speak to like how your customers kind of think about this, as far as, because events are kind of backbone, bread and butter, kind of everywhere. Like, how are you approaching that commercial open source? Making money, growing your business, being successful, but also providing that core infrastructure that enterprise need to manage events.
Yeah. Well, the background between about the open source thing was that we had seen. I mean, taking a step far back, I've talked briefly about event destinations, but what we're seeing with companies like Shopify and Twilio and Stripe is that they're offering the ability to deliver events from these external services directly to internal durable queues. So these will be highly scalable things like SQS or Amazon EventBridge or GCP PubSub. But it got us thinking, well, why aren't, if at scale, at reasonable scale, HTTP has problems. So we kind of went, okay, well, there's something there. So we had this idea of Stripe had already called their offering their event destinations. So went, okay, we spoke to Stripe, we spoke to some folks at Shopify. We're at Patrick Malatak, who's actually was the I think head of product at Twilio, is one of our investors through Matrix. So we had some conversations and went, okay, this seems to be a potential trend in where things are going. So we started off with the idea of event destinations, and we went, well, but there isn't an implementation of that. So then we created Outpost. So as you do, you create an implementation of something, then you have to come up with a name for it. So we created this open source implementation, and again, it really resonated with a lot of people. We reached out to our contacts, and reached out to you, and they kind of went, right, this sounds like a great initiative as a start. Great, it's great that there's now a reference implementation for it. And then we started to see people adopting it. But the fundamental ask was, we want a hosted version, which we hadn't planned on doing. Because often, a commercial approach is, we're going to open source something, then we're going to provide a hosted version of it, and that's how we'll monetize it. But that genuinely was not the plan. The plan was to encourage people to think about this idea of event destinations, delivering their events from their systems, or like API producers of events, to deliver directly to their customers durable queues and remove that HTTP layer. So then we just saw this need for the hosted version. So that's how that kind of came along, and obviously that is working. That there are there's competitors in this space, so there's already a clearer demand for it, although it is quite niche. Because if you think about it, how many people are building a platform they need to publish events versus how many people are building platforms that need to consume events? And the pie, in our opinion anyway, is much bigger around the consumer side. So from our product perspective, the event gateway has much larger market or total addressable market than Outpost and the outbound. But obviously, as part of creating Outpost, one of the event destination types, along with SQS, EventBridge, GCP PubSub, Kafka, RabbitMQ, is the Hookdeck event gateway. So we're not daft, right? We go, okay, well, it's also a mechanism for introducing Hookdeck as a durable destination to consume events, and then think about using that as your backbone for your event distribution, your delivery queue, your filtering. Not quite catalogs yet, because I think within enterprises anyway, this idea of needing to understand the APIs that are available, the event types that are available, how you can subscribe to them. We haven't really got an offering there, although we did have an event catalog plugin. I don't know if you've spoke to someone called Dave Boyne, who's doing event catalog.
Yeah,
So
he was on here a while back, about
okay,
four or
great,
five
yeah,
months
yeah,
ago. So yeah.
yeah. So I think that's really interesting from definitely an enterprise perspective to think about. But again, I think that's like internal, big teams, multiple teams, improving communication, improving visibility. From an external provider's perspective, there's meant to be, open API, webhook support. There's meant to be async API, but the adoption's really poor there. So, that's kind of that's the thinking from a business perspective. Why we've got these two products now, how one naturally organically feeds into the other, and then obviously monetizing through. We're kind of more small to medium enterprise. We're focusing on reaching the long tail of developers, educating best practices around webhooks, educating, thinking about event destinations for API providers, but also developers who are thinking, right, I'm really struggling with my HTTP infrastructure, consuming all these events. That feeds into naturally, organic usage of the event gateway. And then we've also got the Outpost outbound offering, where developers will discover Hookdeck the Hookdeck event gateway as a destination to reliably deliver and then receive their events.
So it sounds like the foundation is laid. Now back to the AI. Do you think AI is going to shift that pie, and the scope and scale, and event destinations is kind of ready for this next wave?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, there's like a simple, like I wrote a post the other day about making your developer platform agent ready, and there's a bunch of simple markdown files, LLMs.txt, human handing over instructions to the AI, through to much more complex things like, okay, well, now does AI have to discover, be able to sign up, utilize your tooling, build a proof of concept, and do that across three different providers, and then go to the human. Hey, I've tried these things out. I've built three proof of concepts. Now you can review them, make a decision. So I think there's that, which is really, really interesting. And I've spent a lot of time on this, kind of making our platform usable from an agent's perspective, and assisting the human to make the agent successful, and doing lots of things around like test harnesses and evals and having scenarios and being able to reliably measure whether or not a certain prompt or the agent journey works. So that's a really interesting thing. But I think from a pie perspective, it probably does make it, back to my earlier comment, I think it probably does make the pie bigger. But I'd still say there are more consumers of events than there are producers. But you've challenged me here when I say that, because obviously if agents produce events and consume events, do they grow the same, or are more events produced? I don't know. And then, yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, so you touched on where I'm going. So I finally got APIs.io back from, I don't know if you remember when I launched APIs JSON in 2014, Steve, Wilmot, and I in 3Scale, we launched APIs.io. And
Yeah.
then 3Scale got acquired by Red Hat. Red Hat got acquired by IBM. And I never got the domain out of the registrar when that happened. And
Right.
someone at IBM just, and this won't be on the podcast, they were nice and say, hey,
Okay.
here you go. You can just have it. So I didn't actually have to go through proper channels. So I got my search engine back and I've been building it over the last 6 months. And what I did 3 weeks ago is I took Cloudflare's kind of gateway doorway checklist, all the things
Mhm.
you mentioned, all the way to, OAuth and X402 payments. And I'm 85% there as a doorway. And I just wanted to see what agents wanted. I wanted to
Mhm.
see what they were doing at this layer. And once I did, like my traffic just started spiking. I started getting all like it was like putting red meat out there. And right now, the reports I generate give me visibility. Half are reputable bots that are looking for content. They just want fresh human generated data. That's like their appetite,
Mhm.
building on Google bot and Bing bot and all that. The other half are looking for well-known key locations. They're looking for your .envs. They're looking for every application, every platform's keys and tokens and
Right.
sniffing
Okay.
that out. And so those ones I put in a gateway, a doorway, a challenge. The first challenge is pretty low bar. Go like my company's GitHub repo. Go start is like the
Yeah.
first challenge because like I want to get them working for me. And so like that's my I want to challenge agents and then force them to produce things and generate events and do things of value, of meaning and purpose. Now, I'm not very successful in doing this quite yet, but because I think they have their own agendas and whatnot. But I think as it evolves, I think they're going to be producing events that, and that's what's, they're all knocking on our doors then to a DDoS level. I think that's going to be the challenge is shifting the balance in that pie you speak of and getting them to do those meaningful events that are actual of business value across many different industry sectors and partners. So I'm hoping
Yeah.
we'll see.
And how are you tracking? Because that's one of the, I think you've got some server side logs that you're using to analyze this.
I have Cloudflare workers dump into Amazon
Right.
S3.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Because I think that's one of the things. It's one of the things I was looking into is, okay, you do spend all this time building, making your content accessible, building skills, all this sort of thing. But how do you know if the agent is actually using it and then successful with it? So obviously you need server side logging. You can't rely on client side logging. Um, as you say, there are bad actors as well as good actors. So that the user agents is sometimes not much use. The amount of additional browser users that I'm seeing, which obviously aren't browser users, they're just someone's built a bot and it's probably running in Playwright or something. Um, yeah, so it's really interesting to hear you're doing that.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and then
API Evangelist has a massive following in Singapore and China. They love my work. They love my work. It's how it works.
yeah, yeah, that's it. And then feeding into the event destination side of things, I still think HTTP is going to be the current winner at the minute. But I think at significant scale, where every event really matters, then whatever the agent should be guided to think about, okay, where am I delivering these events to, or how do I want to consume these events? Well, I'm going to use a durable queue. I'm not going to set an HTTP layer that that create actually problems for both the sender, scaling that HTTP outbound, and needing to have their own outbound queues. and scaling those things rather than just delivering directly to a queue that is going to be able to reliably ingest, that is highly available, highly scalable from the very beginning. I mean, obviously HTTP is not in unsolvable, and you can absolutely scale outbound, you can absolutely scale inbound, but again, we've created an abstraction, a solution, a system that can be more easy to scale or is already scalable for you, like SQS and obviously Hookdeck event gateway.
Agreed. So let's stay at the intersection of kind of AI and technology, but let's shift to you got a small team, and you've been in this game as long as I have been. We've been talking since early days. Now, how are you approaching AI as far as I'm sales marketing. I'm the entire front end of my startup right now, and I'm fairly confident I can continue that for quite a while because
Mhm.
of my buddy Claude and what I'm doing. So but I have other ethical, other concerns that I can't always address. So speak to me about, growing your team, doing, how are you using AI? How does it impact Hookdeck and what you guys are building?
I think I probably shouldn't admit this, but I think we're a little bit behind the curve. But I think you always, if you're on the edge and you're seeing all the amazing things people are doing, and you're seeing the stuff coming directly out of Anthropic and out of OpenAI and all the other great companies. I'm like in a WhatsApp for London Dev Tools and things like that. So I see this stuff happening, and I'm like, I'm not quite there. But obviously, I'm not. I think if I'm realistic, I'm not expected to be there. But still, I still feel like we should have a suite of agents doing 20 things uh, in parallel and running overnight, and then I come in the morning and I should just be reviewing things and kicking off the next set of things. We're not quite there yet. We do have some automated flows around content creation, about skills creation for webhooks in particular, that are still, but a lot of this stuff is manually triggered still. It's still okay. Well, a human has an idea, and then we trigger the parsing, the querying of data, the generation of the content, the thing that generates the pull request. So whether that's webhook skills, whether that's blog content, whether that's new tutorial content, whether that's like yeah, like running of tests on demand, which will sit in the middle of using an agent as well. So that's where we are at the minute. We've probably got about, I'd say probably about 10 different scenarios where agents are in the mix, but often they're either cron job scheduled, like to ensure that like our skills and our prompt. We've got an onboarding prompt for Outpost, for example. I'm trying to make it more prominent. So a user, a normal person signs up, but then their first step is copy or create a .env, put the key in, copy a prompt, and then run. And that's the onboarding now for one of our products. So we want to make sure that continuously works across 10 different scenarios. But again, that's triggered on a cron. It's been human created. I, so there's those, or there's like in the moment I go, okay, well, what are and I could automate this, obviously, looking at our HTTP inbound events, what are the most common user agents from specific webhook providers right now, go generate more webhook skills for those, because it's quite a good acquisition channel. We've got all these different webhook skills that are discoverable that people use, and in there it does recommend using the Hookdeck CLI for receiving the events on localhost. So it's an entry point into our product. But I still think we haven't quite fully done the loop on the trigger being fully automated through to the next iteration and the next iteration. I think we're probably quite cautious as well because you can burn through your tokens. We're not Anthropic, right? So, but I think there's a lot more we could do. Gareth on our team, he was at Orbit, and I think he was at Glitch and various other places. I mean, he's now our head of product marketing, and he has got a bunch of agents with different roles. So he's got only create skills and then tell the agent to utilize that skill. So he's got a VP of marketing. He's got like a social media manager. He's got a like paid ads manager. So his team are agents, and he's built a dashboard. Vibe coded a dashboard to let him look at certain run crons, analyze some data, create suggested tasks, and from that he can either allow, like, accept them or dismiss them. And if they are accepted, then they're obviously categorized, and then there's certain agents that can execute this work. So I mean, he's probably doing more than me, and he's the head of product marketing, which, and I have seen that a lot, right? A lot of people in purely marketing do adopt this a lot. But I think that is ultimately the way we're going, to your point around small teams, how do you scale? And it was a bit of a, we were actually in Paris, was it last week? I think it was last week for a Shopify event. And Gareth shared this, and we didn't know he was doing it. And I was like, I hadn't thought about them. Obviously, they adopt roles, but I hadn't kind of thought about, if I were building a team, a physical team, what would the job specs be for those team members? And then I transpose that to what are the skills for agents? And then I stand these agents up and have to think of a way of orchestrating, communicating between them. And we could do that with the Hookdeck Event Gateway. But that was a bit of it. I mean, but that's, I think, what a lot of teams are doing. I do think they're going, okay, what roles do I need? Agents are going to fulfill that role now, not humans, which is one of these philosophical and worrying things now that we're not employing people. But I do think that's how smaller teams and even bigger teams, right, are scaling. They're identifying the roles. They're going, which pieces can actually be AI? Which pieces do we still need the human for? And building their team out as a fleet of agents. But I think there's tooling missing in that space. The way Gareth's had to build that himself. At the minute, I'm doing some stuff. I'm trying to use Claude, I think they're called cloud agents, to build out some of this content generation. And I feel it should just be, and maybe there are tools and I've just not come across it yet. I define a bunch of skills. I click create an agent, give it that skill, and then there's a way of just wiring it together and defining workflows. But I don't know whether anything
Yeah,
exists on that.
yeah. Well, I'm working towards that, and we'll have another conversation about, I think, that realm. I'm evaluating the stack that our target audience uses, and then how do you
Yeah,
build those role based? What, this role uses Figma, this role uses Jira, and how, and then what APIs they have access to, the scopes. There's, I'm running myself like that, and I'm building out my team. When I first started our startup, trying to build out what hiring I need. And those are just rolling off as skills. I haven't had one that I needed actual to hire a human. And for a runway, it's been great. I'm like,
yeah,
but I do have other concerns. But so what I'm going to do is, I got to jump. I got another call I got to go to. But this becomes Navtico is my new company's capabilities podcast. So I take the best of the 15 minutes, and kind of that becomes a
hmm
podcast. Probably will become two, because there's a lot of material in there. But I tend to, I'll go back through David's, well, my agent will go back through David Boyne's and yours, and do a kind of diff and go, hey, you should probably stitch these together, because that makes a great
right.
point.
Oh, interesting.
And so I do that, and I have like Sam Newman microservices. I've done quite a few conversations from Async API, and those, so the more I do, the more richer that gets.
Yeah,
But I'll ping you when I get something up and share it. But next for me, I'm going through I have a partner profile and market research team, and
yeah.
I want to evaluate Hookdeck and more.